What if I told you that the fall of Egypt's last great dynasty wasn't just a tale of romance and betrayal, but a calculated game of survival played beneath the burning sun of the Nile? And what if the most powerful woman in the ancient world, Cleopatra, wasn't merely Rome's lover, but its greatest threat? This is the entire history of the Ptolemaic Kingdom, a realm where Greek kings ruled an Egyptian throne, where gold flowed through temples while daggers gleamed in the shadows, and where the blood of conquerors mixed with that of pharaohs. From the ashes of Alexander the Great's empire, a new dynasty rose on the banks of the Nile, one that would last nearly 300 years, only to collapse under the weight of ambition, love, and betrayal. Picture Alexandria at its height, marble palaces glittering by the sea, philosophers debating beneath colonnades, priests chanting to gods older than history itself. But beneath that brilliance, secrets brewed, families at war with themselves, and a queen whose every move could shift the fate of empires. And so begins the story of Cleopatra's Egypt, where the crown was heavy and every smile could be a trap. The birth of a Greek pharaoh's kingdom. It began not with Cleopatra, but with a man whose name was whispered with awe across the known world, Alexander of Macedon. When he swept through Egypt in 332 BCE, the people saw him not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Persians had ruled Egypt harshly, treating its gods and traditions with disdain. Alexander, on the other hand, bowed before the sacred Apis bull, visited the oracle at Siwa, and was declared the son of the god Amen himself. To the Egyptians, this was divine confirmation. The gods had sent them a true pharaoh, but Alexander's dream was too vast for one man to sustain. He died young, his empire sprawling from Greece to India, left without a clear heir. In the chaos that followed, his generals, the Diadochi, tore apart the empire like lions fighting over a carcass. Among them was Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest companions, a man both calculating and loyal, with a mind tuned for politics rather than poetry. When Ptolemy took Egypt, he didn't simply seize a province. He seized the richest land on earth, a land whose river made empires bloom. Yet he knew that ruling Egypt meant more than commanding armies. To survive, he would have to become Egyptian in spirit. Even as he remained Greek in blood, Alexandria was his answer. Founded by Alexander, it became Ptolemy's masterpiece, the beating heart of a new civilization. Imagine the city in its youth, wide avenues lined with statues, the great Pharos lighthouse piercing the night sky, and the library of Alexandria rising like a temple of human knowledge. Scholars from Athens, Babylon, and beyond gathered here, trading scrolls, languages, and dreams. The Ptolemies weren't just kings, they were architects of culture, blending Greek rationalism with Egyptian mysticism, yet power rarely comes without a price. The Ptolemaic dynasty was built on ambition, and ambition demands blood. The early kings declared themselves pharaohs, marrying their sisters to keep the royal blood pure and the gods appeased. Over generations, this created a web of family rivalries that would twist tighter and tighter until it strangled the dynasty from within. Ptolemy the First Soter, the savior, was pragmatic. He brought Alexander's body to Egypt, entombing him in golden splendor in Alexandria, symbol that Egypt, not Macedonia, now held the heart of the conqueror. It was a brilliant move. To possess Alexander's body was to inherit his legacy. But as the generations passed, that legacy became a curse. Every Ptolemy dreamed of being another Alexander, but few possessed his genius. By the time we reached the later Ptolemies, Egypt had become both magnificent and fragile. The wealth of the Nile masked corruption and unrest. The Greek elite ruled from palaces while native Egyptians toiled under heavy taxes. Rebellions flared. Plots brewed within the palace walls. Brothers poisoned brothers. Sisters seduced generals. Priests whispered prophecies of divine vengeance. Did you know that nearly every Ptolemaic ruler married a sibling? It wasn't love, it was strategy. Power, they believed, should circulate only within royal veins. But this obsession with lineage created a dynasty that was both godlike and doomed. One where trust was an illusion and every family dinner could end in murder. As the centuries rolled on, Rome began to rise. Its legions marched across the Mediterranean, conquering, demanding tribute, and watching Egypt's wealth with hungry eyes. The Nile kingdom became both ally and puppet, its fate tied to the politics of the Senate. But within the golden halls of Alexandria, one child was being prepared for destiny. Her name would echo through eternity, Cleopatra, yet before her story unfolds, we must understand the world she inherited, a world where gods and kings blurred, where libraries burned for love and power, and where Egypt's beauty became both its crown and its curse. The air over Alexandria shimmered with ambition. Ships from every corner of the known world docked at its harbors, carrying goods, gold, and gossip. Philosophers debated under marble colonnades while priests offered sacrifices to Isis and Osiris. The city was a melting pot of ideas, languages, and faiths. But behind the splendor, the palace trembled with paranoia. Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra's father, would one day face exile, rebellion, and Roman interference, all because the dynasty that began with Alexander's general had become a house of cards. Each generation believed itself chosen by the gods, yet each fought like mortals consumed by fear. The Ptolemaic Kingdom was magnificent, yes, but it was also dying, its veins filled with intrigue and betrayal. And in that chaos, destiny prepared the stage for a queen who would stand against Rome itself. But what made Cleopatra different? What turned a young girl born into dysfunction into one of the most intelligent, captivating, and strategic rulers in human history? Cleopatra's rise, the girl who spoke to the gods in Rome. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to be born into a family where every smile hid a secret, and every sibling could become your executioner? Cleopatra's childhood was not a fairy tale of jewels and luxury, it was a battlefield disguised as a palace. From the moment she could walk, she lived among whispers, poison cups, and daggers hidden behind silken robes. Yet within this storm, a young girl grew into one of the most brilliant minds of the ancient world. The Ptolemaic dynasty had long been a theater of blood. Cleopatra VII, the woman the world would one day know simply as Cleopatra, was born in 69 BCE, the daughter of Ptolemy XII Auletes. Her father was charming but weak, a king who played his flute and threw lavish parties while Rome quietly tightened its grip around Egypt's throat. The Ptolemies ruled by Rome's favor now, and the Romans knew it. Every gold coin from Egypt's temples could become Rome's tool of control. Cleopatra watched this carefully. Even as a child, she noticed how her father flattered Roman envoys, how he borrowed enormous sums from Roman financiers, and how he returned from their meetings pale and trembling. Egypt was still rich, but its throne sat on quicksand. Cleopatra was not like the other children of the palace. While her siblings drowned in vanity and indulgence, she hungered for knowledge. She studied philosophy, mathematics, rhetoric, astronomy, subjects few women of her time ever touched. And most astonishing of all, she learned languages. Not just Greek, the language of her dynasty, but Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin, and others. Ancient writers tell us she spoke at least 7 tongues fluently. When priests of the Nile spoke, she could answer them in their own tongue. O gesture no Greek ruler before her had ever managed. To her people, it made her more than a queen. It made her a pharaoh reborn, but Cleopatra's Egypt was already sliding toward ruin. The priests of the great temples resented her father's weakness, the people starved under rising taxes, and Rome was no longer content to watch from afar. Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, the mighty triumvirs, were dividing the world between them. And Egypt's gold was a prize all three coveted. When Ptolemy XII was driven from Alexandria by rebellion, Cleopatra was still a girl, but she watched the chaos unfold with calm intensity. Her father fled to Rome, bribing senators to restore him to power, while Egypt boiled with resentment. For years, the young princess saw the cost of weakness. She learned that mercy in politics was often a mask for death. When her father finally returned escorted by Roman troops and Roman swords, Cleopatra learned her first lesson in survival. Rome could make or break kings, and so she began to prepare. She watched her father rule in fear of his Roman masters and told herself she would never bow that way. She would be Egypt's ruler on her own terms or not at all. When Ptolemy XII died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra ascended the throne alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. They were meant to rule together, as co-rulers, husband and wife according to custom. But it was a fragile alliance, one built on paper and pretense. The court was divided between those who supported the young queen and those who saw opportunity in manipulating her brother. Cleopatra was only 18, her brother 10. Behind him stood his regent's ruthless courtiers who whispered that Cleopatra was too ambitious, too clever, too dangerous. And they were right. Soon palace factions began to move against her. Cleopatra's face disappeared from coins. Her name was struck from official decrees. Then came the final blow. She was exiled from Alexandria. The same city her ancestors built, the city of light, cast her out into the desert. But Cleopatra was not the kind of queen who waited for rescue. She gathered loyal troops, forged alliances in Syria, and prepared to take her throne back. Then fate intervened in the form of a Roman civil war. In 48 BCE, the rivalry between Julius Caesar and Pompey erupted into open conflict. Pompey fled to Egypt after his defeat, hoping to find refuge with the boy king Ptolemy XIII, but the young king's advisors saw a dangerous chance to please Caesar. They had Pompey murdered the moment he stepped ashore, his head severed and presented to Caesar like a trophy, but the advisors had miscalculated. Caesar, though ruthless, despised such betrayal. When he arrived in Alexandria, he was horrified and disgusted. Egypt, he decided, needed order. And Cleopatra saw her moment. She could not simply walk into the palace. Her enemies would have killed her on sight. So she devised a plan that would echo through history. Under cover of night, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters, rolled up in a rug, some say a linen sack. When the servants unrolled it, the queen tumbled out before the Roman general himself. Imagine the scene, the flickering light of oil lamps. Caesar startled but intrigued, and before him, a young woman of 21, radiant, defiant, and utterly fearless. That moment changed history. Caesar was captivated not only by her beauty, but by her wit, her confidence, her vision. Cleopatra didn't beg for help. She offered partnership. She knew Rome's strength, but she also knew Egypt's value. If Caesar restored her throne, she would make Egypt a loyal ally and keep the Nile's grain flowing to Rome. Caesar agreed. But their alliance quickly became something more. Whether it was love, lust, or politics cloaked in affection, we'll never know for sure. What we do know is that Cleopatra's charm and intellect won her not just an ally, but the most powerful man in the world. When Ptolemy XIII's forces rose against them, Caesar fought beside Cleopatra. The Battle of the Nile was fierce. Streets of Alexandria turned into rivers of fire. Ptolemy's forces were crushed, and he himself drowned while fleeing the chaos. Cleopatra was restored to her throne, and yet, in this victory, the world's perception of her began to twist. To the Egyptians, she was a savior, a queen who reclaimed her birthright. To the Romans, she became something far more dangerous, a woman who could seduce power itself. After the battle, Cleopatra bore Caesar's son Ptolemy Caesar, whom she called Caesarion. But in Rome, rumors swirled like storms. Caesar's enemies whispered that he planned to crown himself king of both Rome and Egypt, that Cleopatra had bewitched him with her Eastern magic. When Cleopatra sailed to Rome in splendor, arriving with her infant son and golden barges gleaming in the sun, the Senate shuddered. The image of the proud Roman general now entwined with a foreign queen sent waves of fear through the Republic. She was exotic, intelligent, untamed, and worst of all, she was a queen who refused to kneel, but fate has a way of turning love into tragedy. In 44 BCE, Caesar was murdered in the Senate, stabbed by men who claimed to be saving Rome from tyranny. Cleopatra fled home to Egypt, her heart broken, her position uncertain. Caesar was gone. Her son was now fatherless, yet Cleopatra did not crumble. She ruled on, strengthening Egypt's economy, stabilizing its borders, and reviving its ancient gods. She commissioned temples, oversaw irrigation, and filled Alexandria once again with scholars and builders. Her charisma could move armies, her intelligence could sway kings, and her resolve would soon bring her face to face with another, Rome destined to shape her fate. Mark Antony. As the curtain closes on this chapter, Cleopatra stands at the height of her power, young, unbowed, and more dangerous than ever. But in the distance, the thunder of Roman ambition is rising once more. The Nile is calm tonight, reflecting the stars like scattered jewels, but beneath its surface, destinies are moving toward collision, and in that next collision, love will become war, loyalty will become death, and Egypt's crown will burn in the fires of empire. The Queen is ready. Rome is not. Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Love, power, and the fall of empires. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that the world itself seemed to tilt toward destruction? And have you ever wondered how love so intoxicating, so human, could bring down empires? This is the story of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, a union that burned brighter than the sun over the Nile and ended in ashes that would bury an era after Caesar's death. In 44 BCE, Rome descended into chaos once again. The Republic was cracking apart. Power-hungry men circled like wolves around the corpse of Caesar's legacy. Among them rose three figures, the triumvirs: Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir; Marcus Lepidus, a politician of convenience; and Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted general, fierce and charismatic, beloved by his troops, and feared by his enemies. Antony was a soldier forged in war. He had seen the world's cruelty and laughed in its face. He was impulsive, passionate, and ambitious, a man who lived as if tomorrow might never come. And for a while, Rome was his to command. But he had a problem: Egypt. Specifically, the woman who ruled it. Cleopatra had survived the storm of Caesar's death, keeping Egypt neutral while Rome tore itself apart. Yet she knew her safety was an illusion. Egypt's wealth, its grain, its gold, was the lifeblood of Rome's empire. Whoever controlled the Nile controlled Rome's stomach. And now that Caesar was gone, she needed to secure her kingdom once more. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, a city in modern-day Turkey. The tone of the summons was imperious Rome calling Egypt to account. But Cleopatra saw through it. She knew the game of power, and she would not crawl to any Roman general like a servant. Instead, she staged one of the most dazzling entrances in history. Picture it: the sun blazing above the Kidnus River, the air thick with perfume and expectation. Cleopatra's barge sails into view, its golden stern gleaming, its purple sails billowing with the scent of incense. Music drifts across the water. Silver oars strike in rhythm as young attendants dressed as Cupids fan their queen beneath a canopy of gold. Cleopatra reclines, radiant as Aphrodite reborn, her eyes steady, her smile knowing. Mark Antony, the conqueror of nations, is waiting on the shore, and for the first time in his life, he is speechless. That day, politics turned to poetry. Cleopatra knew Antony's reputation: a warrior who loved excess, a man torn between discipline and desire. She didn't resist him. She mirrored him. Over feasts that lasted all night, over wine and laughter and games, she revealed herself not as a supplicant, but as his equal, witty, bold, unafraid to challenge him. Soon, their alliance became something deeper. Cleopatra offered Antony not just love, but vision. Together they could rule East and West, uniting Rome's might with Egypt's wealth. She spoke to his hunger for greatness, and he, in turn, spoke to her dream of restoring Egypt's ancient glory. Their affair scandalized Rome. Senators muttered that Antony had lost his Roman virtue, seduced by the sorceress queen. But Antony didn't care. When he followed Cleopatra back to Alexandria, he found a world far more intoxicating than any Roman battlefield. Alexandria welcomed him with open arms and golden streets. Together, he and Cleopatra lived like gods among mortals. They hunted in the desert, feasted beneath the stars, and founded a society known as the Inimitable Livers, a group devoted to pleasure, philosophy, and revelry. But beneath the laughter there was calculation. Cleopatra was rebuilding her image, and Antony was building his army. Did you know that Cleopatra personally financed Antony's campaigns? Her treasury armed legions, built ships, and paid soldiers' wages. She was not a passive lover, she was his co-ruler, his partner in strategy, and sometimes his commander. Yet back in Rome, Octavian watched and waited. He was younger, colder, and far more cunning than Antony. To the Roman public he began to whisper a poisonous narrative, that Antony had become a slave to Cleopatra, that he no longer served Rome but Egypt. Every love letter, every banquet, every gesture of affection became fuel for propaganda. When Antony married Octavian's sister, Octavia, it was meant to seal peace between them. But even marriage couldn't silence the truth. His heart still belonged to Cleopatra. And when he abandoned Octavia and returned to Egypt, Octavian's fury turned to vengeance. In 34 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra staged one of the grandest ceremonies in ancient history, the donations of Alexandria. From a golden throne, they distributed lands and titles to their children. Cleopatra was proclaimed Queen of Kings, Caesarion her son by Julius Caesar, King of Kings. To Rome, this was heresy. To Octavian, it was war. The Roman Senate declared Antony a traitor. Octavian seized Antony's will and read it publicly, claiming that Antony planned to be buried in Alexandria beside Cleopatra. To the proud Romans, this was unforgivable. A general of Rome dreaming of a foreign tomb. War was inevitable. In 31 BCE, the final act began at Actium off the western coast of Greece. Antony and Cleopatra's fleets faced Octavian's navy, commanded by the brilliant Agrippa. The sea roared with the clash of oars and the screams of men. Cleopatra, aboard her flagship, watched as flames consumed the horizon. At the height of the battle, confusion spread, signals misread, formations breaking. Suddenly, Cleopatra's ships turned south, retreating. Historians still debate why. Was it panic or strategy gone wrong? Seeing her flee, Antony abandoned the fight and followed her. His fleet, leaderless, fell to ruin. It was the moment Rome decided his fate. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, their power shattered. Yet even in defeat, their legend only grew. In the months that followed, they rebuilt what strength they could. Antony tried to rally his soldiers, while Cleopatra prepared for the worst negotiations. Surrender or death. Rome came for them soon after. Octavian's legions marched across Egypt like the desert, wind silent, unstoppable. By the summer of 30 BCE, they surrounded Alexandria. Antony's loyal forces fought desperately, but the city's fate was sealed. Betrayal spread through the ranks. Rumors reached Antony that Cleopatra was dead. She had taken her own life, they said. Stricken with despair, he fell on his own sword. As he lay dying, a messenger revealed the truth. Cleopatra still lived, mortally wounded. Antony ordered his men to carry him to her. They brought him to the mausoleum she had built for herself, its doors sealed against the Romans. As she wept over him, he died in her arms. His last words, according to legend, were of love and regret. Cleopatra was now alone, the last queen of Egypt, surrounded by enemies. Octavian entered Alexandria in triumph, but when he met her, even he could not deny her power. Dressed in gold and mourning black, she faced him like a goddess brought low, her eyes fierce even in defeat. Octavian wanted her alive for his triumph in Rome, a chained queen to parade before the mob. But Cleopatra had no intention of being a trophy. She had lived as a goddess, ruled as a queen, and would die as both. Days later, she dismissed her servants, donned her royal robes, and adorned herself with jewels. In her final act of defiance, she allowed an asp of venomous Egyptian cobra to bite her breast. When Octavian's men burst in, they found her lifeless, serene, as if merely asleep. The serpent coiled beside her, a symbol of divine rebirth. Cleopatra was 39 years old. With her death, the line of Ptolemy ended, and Egypt became a Roman province. But her story did not die. In Rome, Octavian became Augustus, the first emperor. Yet even as he forged a new world, the legend of Cleopatra haunted him, the queen who defied Rome, who made love a weapon and power an art. Her death was not the end of Egypt's glory. It was the beginning of her immortality. For centuries, poets, artists, and dreamers would look to her name and see not just a queen, but a symbol of freedom against empire, passion against order, and womanhood against the machinery of power. The Nile still flows, endless and eternal. And somewhere in its whispering waves, you can still hear her voice, soft, defiant, and unforgettable. The fall of the Ptolemaic dynasty. After Cleopatra, the Nile wept. Have you ever wondered what becomes of a civilization when its last heartbeat fades? When the golden crown slips into dust and the gods themselves fall silent? The story of the Ptolemaic dynasty after Cleopatra is not one of conquest, but of echo and empire that refused to vanish quietly, its spirit lingering in stone, scroll, and sand dot when Cleopatra's lifeless body was found. Adorned with gold and guarded by death's serpent, Octavian stood before her tomb and saw both triumph and tragedy. The war was over. Egypt, the richest land in the ancient world, was now his. But the victory felt haunted, for beneath the cool marble of Alexandria's palaces lay a queen who had defied the might of Rome and nearly changed the course of history. Octavian, soon to be known as Augustus, was too shrewd to destroy what Cleopatra had built. He understood power, and Egypt was power incarnate, its fertile Nile, its endless grain, its vast wealth. Instead of crushing it, he claimed it. Egypt became not a Roman province governed by a senate, but Augustus's personal possession, his private kingdom. No senator could rule it, no general could enter it without permission. Egypt would forever remain under the emperor's direct control, its grain ships sailing straight to Rome, feeding the empire that Cleopatra had nearly undone. But the people of Egypt did not forget. The temples still stood. The statues still gazed toward the heavens. And in the streets of Alexandria, whispers of the queen lingered. To many Egyptians, Cleopatra was not gone. She had joined the gods, the living embodiment of Isis, who had returned to Osiris, the eternal cycle of life and rebirth. Pilgrims visited her tomb, laying flowers and prayers. Even in defeat, she remained a symbol of pride of resistance against the invader. The dynasty itself, however, was dead. Caesarion, her son with Julius Caesar, barely 16, was captured and executed on Octavian's orders. "Too many Caesars," Octavian reportedly said. The remaining children twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and their younger brother Ptolemy Philadelphus, were taken to Rome. There, they were paraded through the streets in golden chains during Octavian's triumph, living trophies of his victory. The sight broke hearts, royal children, weeping beneath laurel wreaths as the crowd cheered their mother's conqueror, yet fate is strange. Cleopatra Selene, the daughter of Egypt's last queen, would rise again, this time in a new land. Married to King Juba II of Mauritania in North Africa, she carried with her the memory of Alexandria's grandeur. In her court, she rebuilt a fragment of her mother's lost world Greek learning, Egyptian art, the fragrance of the Nile carried across the desert. Through her, the blood of the Ptolemies did not die. It transformed. Meanwhile, Egypt itself began to change. The temples still functioned, but their priests now served Roman masters. The hieroglyphs carved into stone grew fewer with each passing generation, replaced by Greek and Latin inscriptions. The great library of Alexandria, once the beacon of knowledge for the entire ancient world, was gone, its scrolls lost to time, fire, and neglect. The world had entered a new age, and the old gods were fading like stars at dawn. Did you know that even in the centuries that followed, Egyptians continued to call their queens Cleopatra? To them, it was no longer just a name, it was an idea, a living symbol of divine womanhood, intellect, and defiance. In whispered prayers, her spirit lived on, but the Roman occupation reshaped everything. Egypt became the empire's breadbasket, its people taxed heavily to fill imperial coffers. The once free cities of the Nile now answered to Roman governors, and legions patrolled the streets of Alexandria. Yet even Rome could not erase Egypt's soul. The festivals of Isis continued. The ancient hymns still rose at dawn, and beneath the Roman marble, the old Egyptian heart kept beating. Stubborn and proud, the great irony was that Cleopatra, the queen accused of corrupting Rome, ended up civilizing it. Egyptian religion, art, and science flowed into Roman culture like the Nile into the sea. Temples to Isis appeared as far as Pompeii and London. Roman women began to adopt Egyptian fashion and cosmetics. Even Augustus, the man who conquered her, quietly absorbed the symbols of her land-divine kingship, godlike imagery, the sun disk above the ruler's head, Cleopatra had lost the war, but her ideas won the empire. Still, the silence of Alexandria grew heavier with time. The city that once echoed with philosophers and scholars fell under the weight of bureaucracy and decay. The torch of learning moved elsewhere, to Athens, to Rome, to Byzantium. Yet every scholar who studied medicine, mathematics, or astronomy still drew from the legacy the Ptolemies had created. In a way, Egypt had given the world its foundation, the very alphabet of civilization, now woven into Rome's empire. As the centuries passed, the story of Cleopatra and the Ptolemies blurred into legend. Some said she had not died but transformed, reborn as a star in the heavens. Others whispered that her tomb contained untold treasures, hidden somewhere beneath Alexandria's shifting sands. To this day, archaeologists still search for it, diving beneath the sea where parts of ancient Alexandria now sleep, buried by earthquakes and tides. Imagine it, somewhere below the waves. Marble columns lie toppled, golden statues rusted by salt, and perhaps deep in the silt the resting place of the last queen of Egypt, waiting to be rediscovered. The Ptolemaic Kingdom, which began in glory with Alexander's general Ptolemy I, ended in tragedy with Cleopatra VII, yet, in its 300 years, it created one of the most remarkable civilizations the world had ever known, a fusion of Greek intellect and Egyptian spirit. Theirs was a dynasty of contradictions, conquerors who became gods, foreigners who became pharaohs, rulers who worshipped both reason and magic. Their story reminds us that history is not just about power, but about identity, the struggle to belong, to rule, to endure. Cleopatra's death did not erase Egypt's greatness. It transformed it. Her empire became memory, her memory became myth, and her myth became eternal. Centuries later, poets would weep for her, artists would paint her, playwrights would resurrect her in tragedy. Shakespeare gave her the words she never spoke. "Give me my robe, put on my crown. I have immortal longings in me." And indeed she did. For as long as the Nile flows, Cleopatra will never truly die. Her story will continue to shimmer between history and legend, between love and power, between life and the afterlife. The Nile wept for her once. Perhaps even now it still does. Legacy of the Ptolemies, how Cleopatra's world shaped ours forever. Have you ever wondered why? Cleopatra's name still glows like gold in our collective imagination, while the names of her conquerors fade into dust. Why a queen who died more than 2,000 years ago still inspires novels, films, and art across the world? The answer lies not only in who she was, but in what she represented. The Ptolemaic Kingdom did not merely fall. It transformed the world that came after it. Cleopatra's death marked the end of one era and the silent beginning of another, the age where history, power, and legend fused into myth. After the fall of Alexandria, Egypt became a Roman province, but the spirit of the Ptolemies did not vanish. In art, science, religion, and politics, their influence rippled outward, shaping everything from imperial ideology to our understanding of knowledge itself. The Ptolemaic dynasty had taken the brilliance of Greece and fused it with the ancient mysticism of Egypt, and in that fusion, they created something timeless, the foundation of the modern world's fascination with civilization, beauty, and empire. Let's begin with the realm of knowledge. The Library of Alexandria, though destroyed long before Cleopatra's reign ended, had planted seeds that would never die. It was there that scholars first tried to measure the circumference of the earth, to map the stars, to catalog human language and history. The idea that knowledge could be organized, preserved, and shared, the very foundation of modern science and education, was born under the Ptolemies. Cleopatra herself was a scholar in her own right. Ancient sources describe her as a philosopher queen, fluent in the languages of her people and the arts of healing and astronomy. When we imagine the ideal of a ruler who values intellect as much as power, we are seeing the ghost of her world. The Ptolemies also reshaped the very image of rulership. Before them, kings were mortal men elevated by birth or conquest. Under their rule, kings and queens became gods on earth. This divine monarchy would echo through time through the emperors of Rome who claimed descent from Venus, Through medieval kings who ruled by the grace of God, and even through the pharaoh-like imagery of modern propaganda, Cleopatra's reign blurred the line between politics and performance. Every gesture, every ceremony was theater designed to remind her subjects that she was both ruler and goddess, both human and eternal. But perhaps her most enduring legacy lies in how she changed the world's idea of womanhood. Cleopatra has been remembered through centuries as a seductress, a temptress who brought men to ruin, but that is the mask history painted over her to make her less threatening. The truth is more powerful. She was a woman who mastered the art of survival in a man's world, who wielded intellect and charm as her weapons when swords failed. In a time when women were seldom seen as equals, she negotiated with Rome's greatest generals, commanded armies, and ruled a kingdom that had stood for 3 millennia. She understood that power was perception. When she met Caesar, she used wit and spectacle to reshape her image. When she met Antony, she made herself the embodiment of Egypt, itself majestic, divine, irresistible. She did not chase love. She harnessed it. Her legacy challenges us to see beyond the myths, to recognize her not as a woman who fell for Rome, but as a ruler who dared to stand against it. Even her death became her final act of defiance. The asp, the serpent of Egypt, was not just a symbol of death, it was rebirth. By choosing her end, Cleopatra denied Rome the satisfaction of parading her as a captive. In dying, she reclaimed her throne in eternity. Every artist and poet since has seen in her death something transcendent, the moment when power yielded to destiny, and love outlived empire. The world that followed continued to bear her mark. Rome, inspired by the grandeur of Alexandria, began to transform from a republic of soldiers into an empire of spectacle. Egyptian motifs appeared in Roman architecture. The cult of Isis spread from the Nile to the Tiber. An Egyptian obelisk rose in the heart of Rome, itself silent testaments to the land and queen that once defied it. Centuries later, when the Renaissance rekindled Europe's thirst for knowledge, scholars rediscovered the legends of Alexandria and the writings of Ptolemaic thinkers. Cleopatra's name surfaced again, not as a villain but as a muse. Artists painted her not as a fallen queen, but as a goddess of wisdom, love, and tragic beauty. Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra gave her new life, turning her final moments into poetry that transcended history. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. That line captured what the ancients already knew. Cleopatra was not a figure of one age, but of all ages. She represented the eternal conflict between desire and duty, empire and identity, love and power. And yet, her legacy also reminds us of something deeper. The Ptolemaic Kingdom was an experiment in coexistence, a Greek dynasty ruling in Egyptian land, trying to blend two civilizations without destroying either. For 3 centuries, that experiment worked more or less. They built cities where Greek and Egyptian lived side by side, where philosophers debated beneath the shadow of temples older than time. In their fusion of cultures, they created a model for the cosmopolitan world we live in today, a world where ideas, languages, and beliefs intertwine. The fall of the Ptolemies was tragic, but it was not meaningless. Their story shows that every civilization carries within it both creation and destruction, brilliance and vanity. They reached for eternity, and though they failed to grasp it, their light still reaches us across the centuries. Even now, scientists, historians, and explorers search for Cleopatra's lost tomb. Somewhere near the Mediterranean coast, perhaps beneath the ruins of Taposiris Magna or under the waves near Alexandria's old harbor, she waits. Each discovery, a fragment of a statue, a broken inscription, brings us a little closer to her. But perhaps the greatest discovery is not her tomb, but what she taught us about legacy itself. For the true power of Cleopatra and the Ptolemies was never in their temples or armies, it was in their story. The story of ambition and beauty, intellect and defiance, of a civilization that dared to merge worlds. 2,000 years have passed since the last Ptolemaic queen took her final breath. Yet her name still fills our imaginations, like the scent of lotus flowers drifting on the Nile. Cleopatra was more than a queen. She was the bridge between the ancient and the modern, the final voice of Egypt's gods and the first whisper of a new world. Her kingdom fell, but her idea endured, that greatness is not about how long you rule, but how deeply you are remembered. So the next time you gaze at the stars over the dark waters of history, remember her, the queen who spoke to the gods and to Rome, who lived as legend and died as myth, and whose story reminds us that even when empires crumble, beauty, intellect, and courage never truly fade, for as long as humanity tells stories, Cleopatra will reign again, immortal, untamed, and eternal as the Nile itself.